Hi, everyone. I'm going to give everybody a chance to kind of file into the webinar here. Welcome to our favorite ongoing event series, WGF Library Script Breakdown. I'm Lauren O'Connor, your co-host for this event.
And I'm Javier Barrios, the other co-host. So Lauren and I are librarians, as you probably know, at the Writers Guild Foundation Library. And you probably also know that the library collects and provides access to TV and film scripts on the first floor of the WGA building here in LA.
And if you want to come in and read those film and TV scripts, you can, because we're open again. The strike is over. You don't have to be a member. Everyone just needs an appointment. We're going to toss a link to all the information you need about the library and how to visit. But if you're new to this and it's your first time joining us for a script breakdown, it's been a while for us too, but this is how it works.
So basically, Lauren and I sit down virtually with a writer and talk at length about a script they wrote, and we essentially we dissect the script with pages on the screen.
And for this session, we are delighted to welcome David Hemingson to talk about his screenplay for The Holdovers. If you've read David's bio on the events page, you'll see he's a longtime TV writer producer, and The Holdovers is his first feature credit. Yay!
Hey.
And we're both, Javier and I are both obsessed with this movie. And hopefully if you're watching this, you are too. So welcome, David. Ever since our script breakdown with Coda, we give an ASL round of applause here.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to mention that once we get started, I think there's a way they're going to drop it in the chat how you can maximize like a certain the script or highlight certain things if in case you want to follow along and you want to you'll be able to do that. Just check out the chat. You should be able to get instructions there. But right now, we've got the remainder of 90 minutes to go through the script in detail. So we have a lot to cover. So we probably won't have time for Q&A, but
feel free to use the chat as you're doing to talk amongst yourselves, say hi. It really is, when we're doing this, nice to be reminded that people are watching as we go. So I hope you guys have had a chance to look at the script. If not, I think one of our colleagues will put it in the chat so you can kind of look at it and follow along so you don't get confused. All right, well, that's about enough from us. David, welcome again. So we always start this with a few background questions just to get us into it. First, I think the first thing we want to know is give us the short version of how you came to write The Holdovers. So it started with like a spec pilot script, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically what happened was about 5 or 6 years ago, I kind of felt compelled to write this kind of deeply personal pilot script about my times at this prep school in Hartford, Connecticut. And it kind of related to being kind of a lower middle class kid going to this sort of high tone prep school where my dad ended up teaching. My parents had divorced in the late 60s, and I hadn't seen my father in a while. And I was having a hard time in the public school, and we kind of found enough money through scholarships to get me to the school where my dad was teaching. And it was set in 1980. It had kind of a dynamic that kind of tipped toward me being the kind of protagonist, not even thinly veiled, it was just me basically under a different name. And my uncle who raised me when my folks split up being a huge part of it. And he was a really hard-bitten kind of World War II vet who would say things like, for most people, life is like a hen house ladder, shitty and short. Or, for most people, sex is 99% friction, 1% goodwill, like all that kind of stuff. He imparted that wisdom to me. So I sort of was telling the story of how he kind of guided me through these difficult years and the difficulty of high school and my parents' fraught relationship. And I wrote it, and my agent, now manager, who I think has the best taste and the worst bedside manner in Hollywood, read it and was like, oh, I really think this is a lovely script, and it's kind of very emotional and very resonant and very specific, and it's really unique. And he's like, we can't do anything with it ever, but I'm glad you wrote it. Sort of like, it's so specific. How are we ever going to convince anybody to take a chance on this thing? So, I was flattered that he liked it, but obviously disappointed that he didn't think we could really get it produced. And what he did manage to do, though, was get it in the hands of a fellow client of his, a guy named Niels Mueller, who got it to Alexander Payne unbeknownst to me. So Alexander had the script, and I guess had been thinking about this idea for a prep school movie, kind of based on this ocularly challenged kind of odiferous professor stuck at school with these boys over Christmas break, one of whom's mother just got married. So that's kind of the log line. And he hadn't found anybody to do it, and he hadn't kind of gotten around to doing the research to really understand that world. So he read my script. He's like, he's kind of, oh my God, this is sort of what I want to do. This is the same world. So he kind of called me up out of the blue, and I thought it was a crank call initially. I really did. And I almost hung up because a buddy of mine would call me, and has in the past called me and said things like, David Hemingson, Francis Ford Coppola. And one time I bought it, and I was like, oh, it's so nice to talk to you. I'm so honored that you would call me. And he's like, you're an idiot. Shut up. Fuck you. Who would call you? He'd never call you. Like I'm just messing with you. So I thought I was being messed with initially. And then he kind of convinced me it was actually him and said, look, I don't want to produce your pilot, but would you write a movie for me in the same world? And that's how it all started.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy. Crazy story. It's a true story.
So with features, talk about your experience writing features. I mean, when in your life did you start writing them? Have you always written them? And was it a hard pivot into writing this movie after being so TV focused?
That's a great question. I had written movies in the past. Actually sold a movie that I co-wrote with my buddy Bob Fisher, I think in 2008. So since about 2008, I've been writing movies, but I hadn't really written that many movies. I've written like a couple, one of which got produced. But mostly between then and when Alexander asked me, I was thankfully very busy writing TV and running shows. So movies to me were always kind of a deep and abiding passion, but I couldn't quite, I had to make the rent, so I kind of couldn't really take the time away from my TV work, I thought. And I tried to work hard, but I found it overwhelming. So, I think it was really after I got out of an overall deal at ABC and decided that I didn't want to take another job, and I war chested a little money, that, the Alexander thing had come up while I was working on a show called Whiskey Cavalier, but I hadn't really had a chance to dedicate myself to it. I'd started it when I was working on a TV show. And I kind of threw myself into the feature thing and fell in love with it. I mean, it's different in that a television series, in my opinion, basically is, how can I put it? It's kind of like the series is like a first, second, and third act. And the pilot for TV series is the first act, essentially. Like you're provoking something, you're kind of like ensuring that that people kind of understand the inciting incident and the progressive complications and what it's going to promise. But the vast majority of the TV series is second act. So everything after the pilot, pretty much until whatever the finale is, whether it's one season or 6 episodes or 3 episodes or 1 episode, all that middle section of a TV show is one giant second act. So you're kind of escalating tensions. You're like kind of escalating and de-escalating tension. You're complicating characters. You're kind of changing the trajectory of your protagonist, but you're kind of being true to your premise as stated in the pilot, right? So you've got, if you're The Simpsons, you got 25 years of second act because there's no, there's no finale right now. Or like a movie like Gunsmoke or a TV show like Gunsmoke, but how about like Friends, another good example, or Seinfeld, like, everything after the pilot, between the pilot and the finale, in Friends' case, the final season, was the second act. So in a movie, you're kind of obliged to take all of those complications, all that up and down, all that back and forth, all that wonderful Sturm and Drang, all the comedy, all the drama, and back that into a 2-hour parking space, Whereas in TV, you're given seasons upon seasons if you're lucky to get it done, So that's a very different muscle and a very different discipline, I find. Other people might disagree, but I do think that it's very different. Because it requires economy and it requires you to kind of overwrite and then cut down and not underwrite as much as trust silence, trust being able to slow down, trust being able to sort of like have your character's existence carry the momentum of the story without explicitly having to turn the plot as ferociously. Again, it depends upon the type of genre you're working in. But I think the best screenplays all ping off of character, all are filtered through character, all the action is driven through character. And they pretty much track, even like the sci-fi ones or the more fantastical ones like Groundhog Day, that's pinging off of Phil Connors. That's sort of like constantly coming back to him, and everything is filtered through that vision. So, it's challenging to do, but it's thrilling to do at the same time because it requires, I think, a lot of focus
Right.
and discipline that I had to discover, quite honestly, as a writer, as a
Yeah,
verbose writer, I had to discover that.
yeah, for sure. Right.
Um, for so for this particular project, like I'm sure you have favorite films, favorite scripts, but what were some of the films and scripts that you may have used to get ready for the holdovers?
Alexander and I, very early in the process, he sort of said, you know, I want to write this sort of kind of deeply personal film. I love these 70s films. So it was always kind of going to be a 70s film. We landed on 19, so we considered for about literally in the first conversation for about 12 seconds. He's like 1958 or 1970. And he said, do you have an opinion? He said, but yeah, but I want to know your opinion. And I said, my opinion is this: 1970, because at the time it was like 2018. And I said, 2018 has more in common with 1970 than it does with 1958 in terms of kind of the forever war, the massive, like horrible racial injustice, like all the stuff that was going on was superheated in 1970 and it was superheated in 2018. He's like, you're right. I think socially it aligns better. And I said, the second thing is Peter Weir kind of owns 1958, you know? And there was a long pause. And I thought to myself, I love this guy. Like I'm a slobbering fanboy. Like I love Alexander. He's a genius.
Right.
I didn't mean to insult him. He kind of a long pause. And he goes, oh, you mean Peter, you mean Dead Poets Society? And I said, yeah, yeah. And he goes, yeah, we can't do 58. So, so when we landed on 1970 fully and finally, which is pretty much, you know, the threshold matter very early in the conversation in the first conversation, the question of tone arose. And to the movies I saw to prepare to write in the 1970s tone, or let's say 1970, 1980 tone would be tremendous amount of Ashby. Let me give a shout out right now because I'm a huge fan of librarians. I have librarians in my family. I have 2 librarians in my family.
Awesome.
And so there are a couple of guys who are effectively film librarians at a place called Cinephile on the corner of Sawtell and Santa Monica. Their names are Greg and JP. They're the guys who kind of run the counter most of the time. And then Paul's another guy who's really great. But those guys I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to because I went and I said, look, I know Ashby, I know Altman, I know Raffelson, I know John Avildsen, you know, help me build a knowledge base in terms of tone, not necessarily plot or character, but tone for this film, you know? And those awesome dudes just kind of walked me through over the course of about a year. Like, you know, they have 30,000 titles there and he just, everything from, you know, like the names I just mentioned to more obscure directors. And then I kind of was trying to get into the idea of tortured adolescence. And so, you know, they're like, oh, have you seen 400 Blows, you know? And I'd seen it in college, but they're like, no, you got to watch the Criterion with the commentary. Truffaut's amazing. So I did that. And then what about Bicycle Thieves, you know? And then it was like, okay, we're going to pivot to Italian neorealism. So in order to write this movie, I pretty much watched everything I could find in the 70s, including the kind of mediocre stuff. I've been asked recently, like there's a movie called Vanishing Point that I think is 1973. And it stars Barry Newman, and he plays this veteran who's a speed freak who's delivering a car from like Denver to San Francisco, and like, you know, Cleavon Little plays a blind disc jockey who kind of realizes this guy's on this like suicide run or whatever, and it's a superheated thing. I saw that in the drive-in when I was like 7 because my uncle smuggled me in because he wanted to see it. So he stuck me in the trunk of his old Delta 88. And like, this is like 73. Like, and I was like, how old was I in 76? So like smuggled us in. So I went back to that movie because I remember seeing that movie and having this visceral emotional response to this crazy superheated road picture, right? Kind of like a Bonnie and Clyde knockoff. So it's a long way of saying I saw all the classics and then I went into the more grindhouse and B picture stuff just to get a sense of how to tone the movie. So I've gone on, but that's sort of how I did it. Yeah.
And so from your pilot, was there something that found its way from your pilot into this prep school story for the holdovers?
Plot-wise, character-wise, not really. I mean, the kind of curmudgeonly uncle, you know, definitely that vibe was there, kind of the emotional matrix, the sort of feeling of alienation and difficulty and a yearning for connection. I think all that was in there, but they're completely separate, independent, you know, as regard material elements. It was more from Alexander's standpoint, it was more, you know how to write this world.
Right.
This world. And it's true, I did. I mean, I went there for 6 years, but yeah, and I should say, and I virtually like my whole waking existence was that school. And so I really knew the culture because I would also go run cross country and I'd go to these other schools, or I would debate, and I'd go to these other schools, and I'd be like, oh, this is really fascinating. Here's the common themes, and you just notice the similarities school to school and some of the differences, and that always stayed with me, you know.
Yeah,
That was it. Yeah.
sure. And then like before you started the Holdovers, like writing wise, preparation wise, what did you do besides, you know, saw films, read scripts, anything else like research wise?
Yeah, I started writing. Well, research wise, I started just like, because I think there, you know, was it Stephen King says there are two types of writers: plotters and pantsers, people who really plot things out, and other people kind of fly by the seat of their pants. For me, I just started playing with preparation wise, like who are these people, you know? And I knew from what Alexander wanted, he wanted like kind of odoriferous, ocularly challenged professor and kids, one of whom had this thing. But that's all I had from him. And so I started messing with it, and I started going, okay, is it just him and the kid? I remember writing a series of like almost like short stories. Like Edgar Carrot, who's this Israeli writer, is a great writer of super short stories. So I kept trying to break things in terms of like, here's a beginning, middle, and an end of something that might work. And initially it was very much leaning into Paul and Paul's recovery of a lost love, because he was so devastated and shattered and alone. And then Alexander, after I took a couple of cracks at it, he's a very sweet man, incredibly smart man, Alexander Payne. And he would read these little stories and be like, I really like this. It's kind of got a Raymond Carver vibe to it, with a little Roald Dahl thrown in, and it's very you, and I really enjoy it, and it's an interesting turn. He goes, this isn't the story I think we should tell, but I really like the fact that he kind of teased up these elements. And so like, I kind of said to him, like, so what do you think the epicenter is? He goes, it's the kid. It's all about the kid. And then when we landed on that kind of opened me up, and I was like, okay, the kid's salvation is going to be the laboring oar, which made sense to me. It's going to pull the laboring oar in the story. And it made sense to me because I definitely related to that, you know? So then it was about what does the school look like before we get into it, right? What does the culture look like? How quickly can I reduce it? And can I get some maternal energy in there? Because I felt like we needed some maternal energy. I almost thought of it in terms of like, you know, this holy family almost at this school. And I was very, very, very close to my mother, who died tragically about 24 years ago. And we were possibly close. My folks split, and we were very broken. And she meant the world to me. And I wanted to reflect that energy. And that's how the character of Mary kind of came up, and found her way into the story, because I also, growing up, had my uncles were janitors at Wesleyan, and my father's brothers at Wesleyan and at the courthouse in Middletown, Connecticut. And so I grew up around a lot of working people who actually work for a living, you know. My mom was a nurse for 42 years, nurses assistants, physicians assistants, janitors, cooks. I knew all those people growing up. I was a janitor at my dining hall at Yale, like, because I was on scholarship, I had to make money. So it's like, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for these people extraordinary people living ordinary lives. And I wanted to examine that. And I knew from when I was a kid that, you know, and I'm in my 50s, so I wasn't old enough for Vietnam, but I remember seeing the older brothers of my friends, and especially their uncles, getting drafted and going off and getting killed. And I noticed that disproportionately that was young black men, by and large, in the cohort of people that I knew. And then I started thinking about the sort of inequities of the draft, and I did a bunch of research into that, and I discovered, you know, how I think 10% of the American population was African American, yet 13% of draft age men were after they get drafted, and 23% of battlefield casualties were young black men, like 23%. So as the more I researched it, the more I was like, wow, this woman would have, it's totally credible that her son would have gone, and that this would have happened. And it was kind of a thought experiment for me then of like, what would have happened if unlike me losing my mother had lost me? How could she continue being the immensely strong and emotionally resilient, but also, you know, deeply feeling person that she was? And so Mary sort of kind of grew up into that. And the next challenge was leaving enough space for the actor, because that's not my experience, right? I have not had that experience, but I wanted to leave enough space for the actor to bring their passion and their pain and their understanding and their even right sense of humor to the whole situation, you know. And I think that's where Devine just did an amazing job taking that character and just doing phenomenal, heartbreaking, beautiful things with it, you know, with Mary.
For sure. So what's your on this project, what was your day-to-day writing process like? Do you have like a lucky word processor? Do you write by hand? What
Yeah,
I see
all that
some
crazy.
note
Most of
cards and stuff on your door.
my process has always been standing in this office and staring at the screen and shouting, "What happens next?" And then about 5 minutes later, standing in front of my open refrigerator, shouting, "The answer's not in here." Uh, so that's pretty much my life, right? That's just my life. That's my life. It's been my life for years. Yeah, you know, I mean, I try to get up. I'm a believer as a writer in making your bed. I come from, my dad was in the Merchant Marine in the Navy. My grandfather was in the Navy. My half brothers are Marine. So I kind of grew up in this culture of get up, make your bed, put on hard clothes, and shower, put on hard clothes, because I find it's very easy for me as a writer to just sort of like slump around. The thing is, like, you know, inspiration, I think, inspiration appears sporadically, I think, for all of us, but it's got to find you working, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think what I do is I sit down and I start to write, and then I'll get distracted, but I try really hard to stay on task for like 45 minutes out of the hour and just sort of work it. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? I try not to judge it, you know? I try to be like, because I don't know if those folks are watching, if anybody's watching, but it's like, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but and I don't always have the answer. And sometimes you think you have the answer and you come back later and you don't. So it's really important not to judge yourself too harshly, especially as a threshold matter. You know, as a threshold matter, you want to kind of be gentle with yourself and try to be like, okay, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And you'll find it. You'll know it when it's coming to you, you know, and the points of compression will become apparent. Like I tend to write long because I'm long-winded, as you can tell. I write long, then I kind of trim it down. And I had the great good fortune of, you know, sending pages to Alexander and having him say more of this, less of this. So he didn't write it, but he kind of directed me where it's like, I want more of this, I want less of this. This is interesting to me, this is less interesting. And communicated with me in filmic terms too. Like I want a vibe from like Breaking Point, 1950, Michael Curtiz, John Garfield's Last Picture. There's a through line that is emotionally what we're looking for. Click, and I'd be like, "Hello, hello," and I go over to Cinephile and watch the movie, you know, and I'd be like, "I've been writing like," and you're watching the movie and you're like, "I don't understand what is he talking about? What?" And then you get halfway through the movie, you're like, "Oh my God, there it is. That's the vibe. That's the feeling." And again, it's more of a tone thing and less of a plot thing, you know.
Right.
Um, you know, and I think so. So what I try to do as a process wise, just be gentle with myself, get as much work done as I can. Um, Try to get as much exercise as I can, you know, move around. And because when you're moving around, you're writing. I don't care what anybody says. Like some of my best writing has been done rowing the ergometer or like walking on the beach or just waiting for a sandwich at Bay Cities, you know, like standing in the line. Oh my God, I have a revelation. So I think just, you know, just be open and try not to judge yourself so harshly. I think, you know, there's a lot of shouting and weeping involved in in being a writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and like give yourself the latitude to shout and weep a little bit. You know, it's all right.
Do you know or like have a guess like how many drafts you actually did to get to kind of the awards draft, so to speak?
I would say, you know, low 20s, like 23, 24, probably.
Cool.
That's reason.
Keeping in mind that when I say drafts, I'm not talking about here's an entire 114-page screenplay and here's a new entire 100. So there would be like, okay, I get to page 30. Like the fascinating thing about this one for me, I don't know for anybody else, but for me was the first 30 pages of this movie broke like that. Like I had the first 30 pages, you know, in less than a week, and it really hasn't changed at all since I wrote it. And I thought that movie was going to get made immediately because I had, you know, this is my first thing that got produced feature-wise, and I was like, this is great. I was like, and then right around page 30, right around when they leave it in the helicopter, Alexander started going like, well, you know, what are we doing? Like, how do we bind them closer together? And this helicopter, I fought with him by the helicopter for a couple of weeks because I really wanted to do it. And, you know, because I wanted to establish the idea that there wasn't just, it felt too convenient to me that like, okay, everybody leaves and there's this one kid and there's this professor, because that wasn't my experience and the experience that I saw growing up. It was like 5 kids stay for various reasons. Right. But I also knew that I didn't want to tell the story of 5 kids because that's kind of Dead Poet Society in a way.
Right.
I wanted to get out of that or any one of a number of other school tropes, right? Private school movie tropes. So I wanted to boil it down. So I came up with the helicopter because I'm like, all right, I grew up lower middle class kid, but I knew a lot of rich kids. And I remember when I was in college, there was a 20th birthday party for a friend of mine, and she said, we're going to go away for the weekend. I thought we were going to, Weekapaug or someplace Rocky Neck or someplace in Connecticut around. And there was like Aerosmith's tour bus was waiting in the corner of College and Wall. And it was like, basically, no, we're going to take this bus. We're going to party our asses off out to this location in Ohio, party all weekend, and then take the bus back. So when I was thinking of getting rid of these kids, I'm like, what if one of them's dad is the CEO of Pratt & Whitney? Because like a lot of people I knew work for Pratt & Whitney Electric Boat Shipyard, because I'm from Connecticut. And what if this kid just, was feuding with his old man, and they kind of made peace, and just a helicopter showed up, and I convinced Alexander to do it. And when we actually got to it, we were at Deerfield shooting it, and all of a sudden they wanted a $350 million bond to land a helicopter, which, by the way, the premium for which was triple our budget. So like there was no way we were going to pull it off. And we all of a sudden we were thrown, and finally somebody raised a hand in the background and said, "Hey, one of the trustees, why don't you just land the helicopter on the football field, because that's where the parents normally land their helicopters." So I felt super vindicated that way. So once we got past the helicopter thing, it was about what was going to bind them, and there were a couple of methods that I used to figure that out. So 20 drafts, but oftentimes 30 pages and then like another 20 pages, and then kind of go back and look at them, and then another 20 pages, and then go back, and then a full draft, and then have a conversation about the through line, and go through it again. So yeah, it was not a straight line, but the story didn't change tectonically more than once or twice, and mostly it was about the tectonic changes were kind of in the third act, where I was trying to figure out what secret he was hiding, and how to sort of generate a sacrifice that was legitimate and felt real, and not manipulative, but just real. And that's where most of the work went. The rest of it, actually, some fits and starts, came to me pretty clearly.
Great. All right. Well, so let's get into those first 30 pages that flowed so quickly. Casey is going to be perfect. Okay. So obviously we're going to start on the most important page of any movie, which is page 1. So the first thing we see here is, the date, day 1, December 18th, 1970. Did you use the dates as like a structuring device as you wrote?
Yeah. Basically. I mean, Alexander and I talked about it. There were originally going to be blackout cards, and there were many more of them than actually exist in the film. But we wanted to be able to show the dates to orient people in place and time, because we were going to put them in a very specific world. And also as sort of mile markers, kind of like temporal mile markers throughout the script. That was sort of the goal. So there were actually fewer of them in the movie than I wrote into the screenplay, but they were designed to do that exactly. Yeah.
Got it. So talk about kind of your general approach to the first page. Did it always open kind of with the choir and and the town? Yeah.
We found some kind of dialogue, and part of the reason that I have it there is that, like, he riffed a little bit. Our choir master riffed a little bit, and it kind of went past what I had written. And that was always going to be the opening. The opening was as you see it in the film. I think earlier on I might have had the crew team running, and I think we ended up changing the crew team. Now it's Boys Hurry Across the Frigid Campus. Before, they were like the crew team was out running by the river, or I was thinking about trying to have them sculling, like actually rowing on the river. But I'm also a producer on the film, so that became immediately apparent that it's like not going to put kids on the river in the middle of it. All right, well, but you like the image because it's evocative, and I remember seeing it. So so yeah, this kind of laid down exactly the way you saw it, pretty much from the beginning. But some of it changed because of the choir master's riffing at the top.
Got it. So the first line, don't scroll just yet. In the beginning, there was the word. So let's start with the text, or let's begin with the text, shall we? Is there significance for you to that first line, or?
We're about to hear a fable. It said at Christmas, and in the beginning there was the word, right? So I mean, having been brought up Catholic and converted to the Episcopal Church in law school, I was sort of like, it's interesting that it's this season of miracles, and like, why don't we talk about what the word means? And it was also sort of a nod to my fellow writers, just sort of saying like, okay, this is what I'm going to tell you a story now, and here's the story of these people. So I was trying to frame that up a little bit, you know. Yeah.
Totally. So let's scroll down, or let's go to page 2, where we meet, one of the protagonists, Paul, as a heap of rumpled corduroy. Great description. What I want to talk about is, the bottom of the page with Miss Crane summoning Paul to Dr. Woodruff's office. Now, Paul is summoned to Woodruff's office in the exact same way almost at the end of the film. So my question is, did you kind of tweak this after you had the ending, or did you write the ending after you had this?
Right, the ending after I had this, I dead serious when I said the first 30 pretty much have never changed.
Got it.
The exception of a little riffing from the choir master, and I adjusted for that, in the script. But it's like, no, I always had him coming, because you have to incite the film. It's got to be like, you got to get a sense of what he did. You got to get a sense of their relationship. You got to get a sense of, the cosmology that he, where in the cosmology he sits with regard to his colleagues and with regard to his boss. So it was always going to start with this, and deep down I always knew it would end with this too, but I think it really will become very apparent a couple of drafts in. I mean, we can talk about how the movie could have ended. There are actually 2 other endings that you could find in this movie that don't end, and they're there right now. There are points you could just say, okay, we're done here. But I go past those when we go back to school, and after he tells them to take out their pencils. But I always knew it would kind of end with Woodruff, because I wanted to sacrifice,
For sure. Well, and just as a personal, I was looking at the screenplay, speaking of Hal Ashby, for The Last Detail, in preparation for this. And I just noticed, literally in the same exact spot in that script, Jack Nicholson's character, the guy comes running and is like, the master at arms wants to see you. And I was like, this really does feel like a 70s movie.
You need a crisis moment late in the play, and and like The Last Detail, it stems from conduct, it stems from conduct that is sort of prohibited or questionable conduct, right? Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to move on to page 3. So we don't want to linger too long on here, but this is when we meet Angus, and can you talk a little bit about introducing Angus while arguing with Crandall and Kuntz, their choice of
Sure.
that way?
Absolutely. To me, I like to meet characters hot. I like to meet them in the midst of an attitude or an expectation. And so the fact that he's packing gives us a sense that he definitely is hopeful, and he's out of there. I want to announce the fact that I'm out of there. And he's going to get shit from somebody. Crandall's is going to blow him shit, and he's going to push back, and we're going to get a sense of what I definitely experienced, which is this sort of slightly Lord of the Flies culture amongst adolescent boys, that are definitely they're kind of locking horns. Oh shit, what was this? I lost you. Hang on, can you hear me?
Oh, yep, we can hear you.
Yep.
Oh, this is weird. I can't see you anymore. Hang on a second. There you are. Okay, sorry. Okay. So yeah, I wanted to get some of that locking horns thing going on immediately, because it gives you a sense of the pecking order. It announces who Kuntz is. Kuntz is being kind of a dick, right? Crandall's there, and ironically, Crandall, interestingly enough, was the other kid who was up for the role of Angus. And Don beat him out, and he's actually a very good actor. The kid who plays Doug Crandall, but he's a very good actor. But just wasn't quite entirely right. But we loved his attitude. So it's this same sort of locking horns thing that you want to establish. Here are some fundamental power dynamics that we're going to amplify going forward. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So then I'm going to move to pages 6 through 9. So we feel these are pivotal pages. So I want to talk about this. You start with the professor, the 2 professors talking about how who got stuck with it, poor wall-eyed bastard. I think it's right over here, right? Ungenerous of them. Yeah, there he is. And then and what I love about this, it's very economical, because then the next scene, Dr. Woodruff does not have to say, well, you babysit the kids. So we don't, you don't, so it's almost like one scene except split into two.
Exactly.
So you introduce a lot, which is, we love that, by the way. Economical writing is just fantastic. So can you, now you also introduce the cognac. Can you talk about what you're trying to accomplish with here in this particular area?
In this scene, you kind of want to get a sense of attitude, of, again, institutional power. You know, I love the fact that Alexander, and if you look at his other movies, you know, like I said, he's a brilliant, brilliant director. If you look at, for example, Sideways, there's a lot of trophies in Sideways when they go to the steakhouse, you know, or other things in Nebraska. There'll be like basically animals, sort of like stuff, taxidermy animals. And there's a bear in Woodruff's office going like that. You know? Which is kind of great. And that's the Alexander touch, but it was also kind of meant to be like, you know, here's a lair, like a den. It's this bear's den that you know that Paul has entered into, and it's a power dynamic thing. It's also, it shows Paul smart enough to know it's because I failed, you know, Jordan Osgood, right? And then you know, Woodruff doesn't deny it. Woodruff is like, you know, I begged you to give the kid a bonus, you know. And he says, you know, there are instructors here who will do that. I'm not one of them. But he states a sort of raison d'etre here, which is sort of like, you know, we cannot sacrifice our integrity on the altar of their entitlement. This is the Stoic. This is the man of high principles. This is the man who, you know, in his own mind is upholding a great tradition. And he's willing, like a Stoic, to take his poison. He doesn't really bitch about the fact that he's doing this. He accepts it because, you know, in Latin, he says, you know, not for ourselves alone are we born. So he sort of sees himself almost as a bit of a hero here, I think, in his own mind. He'll do it because it's the right thing to do, you know.
Wow.
So I think there's some comedy in there too, I think, partially.
Oh yeah, there's plenty. What I love about this too is that this is the lair. I thought about the whole thing about the lair because at the end, you know, you go into the dragon's lair again, you know, for the final climax. So then we're gonna, Casey, we're gonna scroll down to page 9. So basically, by page 9, you know, like he has the line just saying like your only task is to ensure the boy's absolute safety and to be a human being, please. I mean, we just want to say like great setup, great. You know, if you're talking about first 10 pages, this is it. So congratulations. So pages 10 through 12. So we'll quickly make note of this scene in the classroom. It establishes Paul and Angus as a pair in a fraught teacher relationship. Is where you go. What were you going for here? With that, we know starting their relationship like in that way.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I apologize.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did you lose me? So basically, what were you going for here? You were beginning the relationship, and we know it's fraught already, student and teacher.
Exactly.
So what were you going for in that scene?
In the classroom scene, it was just to underscore. We've seen him in the headmaster's office kind of go like, there are teachers who will do that. I'm not one of those teachers, right? Now we're seeing actually exactly how much of a hard ass he is. So we're kind of amplifying what we've established. We sort of stated it in that conversation, and now we're seeing it on its feet. It's what I call a show don't tell moment, right? He's showing us who he is because he's told us who he is on the A side. He told us, you know, who he is, and now he's actually showing it. But we're using the scene to sort of establish one of our kids we'll see going forward, Kuntz. But also we're seeing that Angus, he gets the B plus. Everybody is getting like the F, you know, F plus kind of situation, and Angus gets a B plus. So we can see that he's sort of smart, but we also see in the scene that he's sort of like, excuse me, why are, you know, doesn't it seem kind of absurd, you know? So he is teasing apart what would be a comparatively, not really an easy solution, but teasing apart something that would be the promise of an escape hatch for his fellow students, possibly, you know. And he probably thinks it's legitimate because, you know, it is sort of a ridiculous thing to do, and maybe part of it is the lurking truth that he got a B plus and he doesn't necessarily need the grade, right, to come up. But it shows that, like Paul, he doesn't quite read the room all the time, you know, that he kind of pushes back in a way that ends up dooming his colleagues. I don't think it's out of malice. I don't think there's any malice in him whatsoever, but he's got blinders on a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
So we'll move to page 14, which is when they're in chapel. And we were introduced to the character of Mary on page 5, you know, leading a half dozen kitchen workers. But I feel like 14 is really the beginning of her arc.
Yeah.
Like that sentence at the top. You know, Mary can barely hide a mix of powerful emotions, grief, anger, resentment behind a stoic face. And I was rewatching the movie this weekend, and it's particularly like Father Joe saying, like, please know we accompany you in your grief.
Yeah.
Ugh. And then it cuts to, you know, shouts of joy as boys are hauling suitcases.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's, if you were picking up on that. And also, like, there's 2 camera moves. Well, Alexander, like I said, I think he's a brilliant director. But there's a couple camera moves that I've always loved because they are just so kind of take my breath away in terms of the emotional impact of them. One is her sitting in that chapel, and it's kind of a low angle shot that's a push in, and Woodruff's sitting next to her, like looking at her, you know, and she's looking up at Father Joe, and you can see all those emotions on her face, you know. And the other one actually is when she asks Danny for another drink in the party. But both those scenes to me show like this person is justifiably angry at what's going on. And this is not what I wanted to convey in that moment was this is not the end, far from it. It's the beginning of her story. You know,
Yeah.
this is the beginning of her story. So yeah, you know, and like you say, and then the kids are all like, you know, we accompany you in your grief, happy Hanukkah. Everybody's like, yeah, you know, it's like oh, you know, these folks do not empathize, they do not feel, you know.
And you see that juxtaposition like again and again throughout the script. It's very yeah. And so I'll just so everyone is kind, you know, can kind of follow along with the story here. At the bottom of 14, we've got Angus, you know, finding out sadly that he doesn't get to go to St. Kitts. You're telling me this now. And we'll move to page 16, where we've got up at the top. I love these descriptions of you know, Jason Smith and Ji-yoon Park and Alex Allerman. Do you are character descriptions something that, you know, kind of you pare down over the course of multiple drafts, or
yeah. I mean, to me, economy is something that, you know, because I am, as you can tell, I like to talk. So it's like for me on the page, sometimes I will try to get really rich with the character descriptions. I also learned, just for what it's worth, if you can combine economy and specificity, there's a writer named Bruce Robinson who wrote a movie called With Nail and I, which was a huge influence on me. It's 87. Bruce Robinson directed and wrote. Richard E. Grant, Paul McGann, and Richard Griffiths are the principal stars of the movie. And he started as a novel, and it took him 20 years to write the screenplay. But the descriptions, I have it over here signed. I could get it for you and read some of these descriptions, but I won't waste our time. But they are so specific and so funny. And what I learned writing television for 27 years is if you can make people laugh or lean in on the descriptions, then they're more likely to engage on the action and on the verbiage, on the dialogue, you know? So yes, to answer your question, I did cut them down, but I tried to be as evocative as possible in describing people and situations, because before it's a movie, it's read by somebody who's going to make it a movie or not make it a movie. And to me, having written many, many pilots, like, just be as fun and as specific as you can be. And every single letter and punctuation mark is valuable. So use your time carefully and deploy your words as consciously as you can. At least that's what I try to do, you know?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we'll move to page 17. And it becomes like a list of reasons that this is just going to be the most miserable Christmas of all time. My question is, did you actually make a list of everything that would make this horrible?
No, like I said, this weird thing is these first 30 were just like, I was like, how would this be terrible? You know, but I sort of was like, you know, basically Angus is pushing back, you know, and this guy's just like, okay, well, the gym can't go in the gym. It's 15 degrees out. It's good for you. The Romans Bay is naked in the freezing Tiber. It's like, this guy is really going to grind us. It's like, oh my God. I think one of the things that got cut was at one point we'd be able to go off campus, and it was like, you will be afforded, yes, we will be leaving campus on Christmas Day to go to church, you know. And like it's like, that's it. Can I wait in the bus? Yes, you may wait in the bus. Will they leave the heat on? We'll discuss it. That kind of thing. You know, it's literally sort of like this guy was going to give nobody any quarter, but we feel like we didn't need to go all the way there. You know, I think it kind of covers that we'll be bunking the infirmary. You know,
Right, right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we're gonna skip ahead a few pages to page 24, but before we do, I just want to point out, because it's hot, like Javier's favorite line in the movie. This is the most bullshit ever.
It's repeated. So I love how it opens and closes the scene.
yeah. Yeah. It's because I think that's what we would all say, you know, it's just sort of like getting a dose of that. As soon as you got clear of the guy who was going to grind you for the next 2 goddamn weeks, you'd be like, fuck this, you know, you'd be immediately like, this is terrible, you know.
Yeah. Most bullshit ever.
Yeah, it is the most
So on page 24, Kuntz like truly is like the crown prince of all the little assholes, insulting Mary's cooking.
Yep.
And what I want to look at on this page is Paul's little block of text towards the bottom, consider yourselves lucky during the Third Punic campaign, all of that. I mean, he's constantly offering these facts and whatnot.
He's that guy. He's that guy.
First, yeah. How and why did you land on ancient civilizations as his subject specialty?
Well, that's a great question. Like, my dad was an English teacher. I was a kind of dual major in English and history in college, and I went to law school. But for me, it was a couple of things. I'm like, yeah, the English thing, but I feel like I've seen Professor Keating in Dead Poet Society be an English teacher. In the pilot, the dad was an English teacher. I'm like, I don't want to repeat myself. This has got to be new. And then I thought to myself, well, who is this guy? Like, he's stuck in his own life. He's stuck in a conception of himself that is inaccurate. It might have been accurate at one point. He's stuck in the past. And that goes to the title, Holdovers. Like, he's holding over in his own life. And so, if someone is obsessed with the past, they're obsessed with what? History. In this case, it's ancient history and the sort of glory of ancient Rome. Like, there's a great, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Patton or read the screenplay for Patton, which Francis Ford Coppola won the Oscar for, right? Yeah. There's so much of it where you've got George C. Scott standing there in various fields in Italy, kind of going like, and the Carthaginians did this and this. It's sort of like, he just sees himself in such epic terms. I've been reincarnated. I am Alexander the Great, kind of thing, And I thought to myself, well, Paul Giamatti or, Professor Hunnam, which Hunnam is basically kind of a mumbled version of human and humble, and you almost lose Hunnam. It almost eats itself. The word eats itself. It collapses in on itself, but it's human, it's humble. It's the almost hard to say because he can't articulate what he really wants or who he really is, So Paul Hunnam is not some warrior prince like George, like George Patton was. Not 4-star general. He's a man with secrets hiding at a prep school, but he sees himself, I think, in these terms, and these are the allegories that he deploys.
Yes. And how do you write in that voice? Like, you are an ancient civilizations professor who went to Harvard. Like, is that like hard or like?
I was raised by this guy, Earl Cahill. I can show you a picture of him. He looks kind of like Paul Hunnam, but he died at 95 about how many years ago? 8 years ago. But he was raised off the coast of Washington State, born in 1920, didn't hear a radio broadcast till he was 9. So he was raised on books like Thomas Hughes's Tom Brown at Rugby, Tom Brown at Oxford, Tom Brown School Days, Thackeray, Dickens, which I was also raised on. So he fed me these books when he was kind of raising me as a kid. And he had a very eclectic way of speaking, and it's almost like a very 19th century way of speaking. And so I kind of absorbed it. So I was a very weird kid who got beat up a lot because I spoke in a strange way, I was a kid. And it was like, I just sort of channeled this guy that I knew. And in terms of the actual kind of granular particulars of the ancient history, I've always been fascinated by history. And I was it was my double major. So I sort of went back and started looking at the stuff that I found fascinating and reread. I wanted Marcus Aurelius to figure prominently because Marcus Aurelius was something that I got turned on to, when I was a kid. And so I just, his specific patois, the way he actually speaks, is sort of drafting off of this man who raised me, who was a very peculiar, brilliant man. And then the facts are just things that I was kind of recalling and then amplified with additional research.
Fascinating. Cool. Yeah.
So we're going to move on to page 26. Let's see, they're watching to the. So we're gonna make sure they're watching the Newlywed Game. Yeah. So basically here, like Mary, Paul joins Mary watching the Newlywed Game. So we love that this is a good nod to the 70s, and I love the fact that you knew that there would be a rerun right during this time, right?
Yeah.
Paul has never seen the show, so Mary explains it's a show where they ask couples questions to see how well they know each other. It sounds like court and disaster, all that. But this is a perfect vehicle, we feel, for like exposition. So how did you come up with that? Was that intentional?
Yeah, totally intentional. I wanted them to watch something on television because that's what you do. You'd be kind of abandoned to whatever was there, and TV. He doesn't really watch TV, listens to the radio and reads books. She's watching TV, like most people watch TV. He wanders in, he's lonely, right? And I thought, if they're going to watch television, well, what else would be on the TV in 1970? I mean, yeah, you could point to a bunch of different stuff. It could have been Mannix, it could have been Gunsmoke, it could have been any one of a number of things. But then I thought to myself, again, in the interest of kind of like using all parts of the animal, right? And the nose to tail of it all, like what TV program is going to provoke the most interesting conversation about where he is in his life? And I thought the Newlywed Game, because he's so kind of cauterized from his own sexuality and his own emotions and everything, like watching these people have these weird conversations, he's like an alien watching this. What is this exactly? And Mary, of course, has had love and heartache, and she's been much more exposed, and so she can kind of approach it that way. But it's a great way, like you said, to kick open the door for some exposition. It doesn't feel like we're just carrying pipe. It's like these people are talking about what this program provokes, in them. And it gives us a chance for comedy. There was actually a line that got cut from the bottom of either it's this scene or the next Newlywed Game scene. I think this scene actually was one long scene, or two Newlywed Game scenes separated, right? But I think originally I wrote it as one, and we decided to split it up.
Okay, that's cool. So we're gonna move on to page 28. So this is where Mary and Paul talk about Curtis, Mary's son, who was killed in Vietnam. And sorry, go ahead. And then through her dialogue, we really get a sense of her backstory and her voice. Like, here we are with my Curtis in the cold ground, and those boys warm and safe in their beds. So by the way, there's that juxtaposition again about the class. But can you talk about writing Mary as a character?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I just try to get to that emotional core that I understood from my mom. There's that level of love and devotion that she had for me, and again, I did the thought experiment of, like, as opposed to me losing her, what if she'd lost me? How would she manage it? But for me, it was also the knowledge of having lived and worked with people of all races growing up, and seeing sort of the inequity, and kind of going like, how does one maintain this, and trying very hard to tell the absolute truth while giving the actor, because that's not my experience. So I have to hold that space for the actor, right? I have to hold that space for somebody like Dave Vine. So how do I tell the maximum amount of truth and let her deliver her truth within those words? And so I read a lot of Chekhov, and like I was trying to get very simple, very honest, very forthright. We've established trust with the two of them talking about, they're laughing with each other, right? He says, "Yeah, my son thought you were an asshole," So it's sort of like insightful, sharp hit. So it's like, all of a sudden there's an ease with them, and so she feels perhaps easy, and they've both been drinking bourbon because they both like to drink bourbon. So it's sort of like there's been a slight breakdown in their traditional roles at this point, and they're starting to relate to each other as people more and more. And so I felt like she would share some of this stuff in the most matter-of-fact terms, because I think she's in many respects a very matter-of-fact person. She's had to deal with a lot of terrible things, and she's got monumental strength, but there's also this tremendous vulnerability in her. So it was about trying to balance that and create a space for the actor to do that, because, as I said, this isn't my experience, and I just wanted to honor her experience and make sure that I gave her space to convey that. I hope that makes sense. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, so pages 35, 36. So this is the helicopter scene. You know,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have everybody literally living in a helicopter except for Angus,
Yeah,
whose
yeah.
mother and stepfather are unreachable.
Yeah.
So he's stuck on an island. It puts more pressure on his relationship with Paul and Mary.
Yeah.
And then on page 36, the next page, so the newlywed game, like, you know, inspires Mary to ask Paul if he's been married. When we just love like his response, you know, like it's not really a question, but we just love like the way you laid that.
I don't know. I like being alone. Always found myself drawn to the aesthetic. Like,
Right,
Yeah, you know, like a monk. Like if
yeah.
there's ever a dude who's justifying the fact that he is like adrift in life, it's this guy. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna kind of like, I'm gonna draw upon the thing that I've kind of framed my entire life around and suggest that perhaps there's a great nobility in my complete isolation, you know? Um, like, you know, he's telling himself this as much as he's telling her this, you know?
Oh, for sure.
and
Um,
and the helicopter was brilliant, really, because I did think this could have gone in the Dead Poet Society direction, you know, and deal with every single one. But this
Yeah.
is brilliant because you really want to isolate them.
Yeah,
And so
thanks, man. No, I totally, you're picking up on exactly what I was going for. It's like I wanted to get those other kids out of there, but it was important to have them because I wanted to provide context. And where Alexander's again brilliant is little things like when Alderman throws the glove into the water and watches it go, and we hold on him, or when Mr. Park wakes up and he's having this hard time, and there's this moment of real kindness between the two of them and understanding. Like I didn't want to have those kids just gone from the beginning because I wanted for them to have lives and for them to have moments, and then for those moments to also inform our opinion of Angus going forward, right? So the helicopter comes and takes them away, uh, and it's also kind of community, like, you know, it's like Angus is the last one left. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, how much harder is it going to get for this kid, right? Um, you know.
So we'll jump ahead a little bit to page 42. And just to kind of fill everyone in on like what's happening. So Paul finds Angus, trying to book a room at a motel on a payphone. He gives him detention. Angus runs into the newly lacquered gym, tries to vault over the pommel horse, and pops his arm out of his socket.
Yeah.
So Paul drives Angus, who is writhing in pain, to the hospital. He's freaking out. His one job was to keep Angus safe. He
Yep.
says facts won't matter to Woodruff. Woodruff will make it Paul's fault, which is very telling. And then at the top of page 43, this is the end. You know, they'll inform the school, they'll inform your parents, and then it will be curtains. You're gonna get me fired, you. So we heard you. Okay, so he's super concerned. They're in the hospital, but Angus essentially saves Paul here. By telling a lie.
Yeah.
So we heard you talk in a previous interview about how being in on a lie can really bond two characters together.
Oh, yeah, I discovered it right in this
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah, can you just kind of talk about that, how that relates specifically to, you know, this moment?
Yeah, you want to bring people together in an organic way, and it's not like they're friends at this point. You know, it's not like they really share any kind of emotionally kindred relationship. But the fact that the kid steps up and kind of elegantly sort of pivots this thing, and he signs up for it, it's like, you know, it's like I'd imagine if you're having an affair, if you were doing that and hiding it from somebody, well, you'd have a secret against the world, but those two people in that situation would be perhaps sharing things with each other that they wouldn't share with the rest of the world because they're them against the world in a weird way, you know. Later on, there's also a lie with Hugh Kavanaugh that, you know, we flip it, and Paul advances that lie, and Angus goes along with it, you know. So to me, I just discovered this in this moment. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I never thought of this before. I never thought that if you put people in this situation, that they have a bond that's sort of unbreakable at this point, you know. And that's sort of what I was trying to accomplish. And I honestly stumbled across it, and was one of the light bulb moments for me in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I just want to just note on page 45, towards the bottom, there's a little bit of a setup where Angus says, we, monsieur, now you owe me.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuck with me. And so we'll move to page 50. Jumping ahead a little bit here. So you've got this scene where after the hospital, Paul takes Angus for dinner at the Winning Ticket, which is a great name for a bar.
That was a bar in Colebrook, Connecticut that my father and I used to go to.
Yeah. Oh man. So Angus wants a Miller High Life, the champagne of beers.
Champagne of beers, as my uncles would say. Champagne of beers. Yeah.
And he later upsets a wounded Vietnam vet at the pinball machines, and Miss Crane, who works there as a side hustle, ends up having to save Paul and Angus, basically.
Yeah.
So when they leave the Barton campus, it is very clearly 1970 out there. Was it challenging to write it in the 70s? How did you approach that?
It wasn't really that hard, just because I remember them. Again, I was a kid, I was like 5 years old when 1970 rolled around, but I remember, because I think the Vietnam War ended in 75, I was 10. So I remember, um, the early 70s very keenly and very clearly, and the sort of attitudes, and there was a degree of optimism, but there was also a degree of like, serious social turmoil, kind of like just like teetering on the brink. And you would see, because my mom was a nurse for 42 years, mostly at Mount Sinai Hospital in Hartford. And, she would come home from the ICU and tell me these stories about, vets that would come back and they would have these horrible wounds. And there wasn't really, like, PTSD was barely being acknowledged, So I kind of had that sort of emotional memory of those things happening, and just trying to write trying to write the original humanity, the true humanity of these people, knowing a little bit about that allowed me to kind of put it in the right social context, if that makes any sense. I hope it does.
For sure. And so we'll move to page 52 and 53. So they after they leave the bar, Angus asks Paul if he ever served, and then brings up that Paul smells, which is kind of towards the bottom of this page. And you're so humiliated for Paul. It's just like almost hard to watch. How did trimethylaminuria, did I say that right? Come about?
We're no pun intended, just sniffing around how to figure out like what the disease would be. And I think Alexander and I like found out that this was actually something that does throw off the fish smell. And it's a real condition. And it's tough. So it's just like one more thing on top of the eye to complicate his life, So the condition, the condition's meant to, and I love the fact it also speaks to Angus when he's like, can I be honest with you? It's like, it's like, I can even smell it on your coat. Mind if I crack a window, and more toward the end of the day. So he's obliged to tell the truth again to this kid who he has an intimate relationship with. This kid who he also just basically saved his ass in that bar by offering to buy those guys beers, right? And how does he get repaid? How does he get repaid? By his kindness and by his observation that like Barton kids don't go to Vietnam except for Curtis Lamb. He's repaid by the observation that he stinks,
Right.
So Angus may be many things, but he's most definitely sort of a teenager without an editorial mechanism, And Paul doesn't scream at him. He explains the situation, which I think is interesting.
That is. So we're gonna move on to page 62. So let's see, give her a minute to get. Oh yeah, so they go to the Christmas party, right? To Mary's. So this whole scene, they all have a moment of connection.
Yeah.
So like, can you like talk about like what the impetus for that was?
Yeah, I wanted to get them out of the hermetically sealed environment that I'd created. Basically, it was Danny, Mary, Angus, and Paul. And I wanted sort of reinforce the relationships and advance their stories, but I wanted to do it in the context of something other than this big, empty, gorgeous school. And so a party is always a fun thing to write. The anxiety becomes when you write it, and I think it's like an 8 or 9 page scene, we're cutting around it, right? But my director is like, oh my God, this is a huge amount of pages in this party. It's a couple of days, and a not long shooting schedule. So, bringing them there, the goal was to provide, again, like when we had those kids at the beginning, provide a larger world, additional context, them in different situations. How were they going to respond? And I wanted them to each have an opportunity for victories and for setbacks. And it's best if that happens in an environment that will afford us the opportunity to learn more about them. And if you have people who you haven't met before or situations you haven't been in, it affords you that opportunity, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of that, so pages 64 through 66. So we have Mary playing records, and she puts on Artie Shaw, and it breaks her because Curtis loved him. And then also like Paul doesn't want to say much about his dad, but he does bring up Dr. Green.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about backstories and how these past characters and past lives things goes into how the characters are shaped for you?
Yeah, you know, I actually did total biographies in my own head. They're not really written down of each of these people. And there was a woman named Florence Green who was the headmaster of my school before a guy named Charlie Todd took over at the Watkinson School in Hartford, Connecticut. And Florence Green was renowned as this incredibly fantastic educator, and who had tremendous principles. So for me, you know, he left when he was 15. Like my dad went when he was 15 and joined the Merchant Marine with a 10th grade education. But this idea of uncoupling yourself from a difficult situation, which my dad had, because my grandfather was kind of not the best guy a lot of the time. And my dad ran away from home and joined the Merchant Marine World War II at 15. So the idea of abandoning this thing, you know, and running toward this other thing really appealed to me, because I kind of grew up with this sort of almost subliminal understanding.
Right.
You know, and so I always thought his backstory was he made his way there, did incredibly well, and then went off to Harvard, and then something had happened at Harvard where he got kind of screwed and was forced back into this place that he knew and almost arrested, holding over now forever there.
Right.
I hope that's responsive, but yeah, that's what I was
Yeah,
going.
yeah, for sure. And then on page 67, Kate, we just want to do so basically the cool red herring. Let's see, we have to say where Angus, hold on, where Angus basically says that his father's dead, right?
Yeah.
My father's right in the middle there.
Yeah.
You know, and love that red herring. So was that like, did you already know at that point what you were gonna do with the?
Yeah, I knew because I discovered that idea of the lie or the mislead, that these people are trafficking in these things, and sometimes, you know, people will lie to you, get an emotional response, and he was pissed at him for a variety of reasons, and he says this because he can't tell the truth because he's ashamed of what happened to his dad, and he's afraid it's him. But he's also doing it to sort of like because he's angry and he wants to announce, you know, that his life is not what Paul thinks it is. But instead of telling the truth, saying my father's in a mentalist institution, he says my father's dead, which obviously is a grenade. You throw that, you know, that's a grenade you throw at somebody. You do that to hurt somebody. And he wanted to hurt Paul in that moment. He was pissed. And it was also in his mind, his father was dead, but he wasn't dead, which was the terrible truth that he's grappling with, you know.
For sure. So we'll move to page 70, where Paul, you know, he's gone out and he's bought a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
And what I want to know is, I want to know about Paul's character arc. Like, is that something that you kind of have to plan out scene by scene, like, you know, tick by tick? How do you track that?
I kind of was tracking. I knew I wanted to bring them together, and I knew I wanted to get them on the road, you know, because Alexander had said to me, like, you know, a lot of my pictures are road pictures. It'd be great to get on the road. Like, let me see if I can find a way to get them on the road. So I was sort of like, what if we get, and again, for me, it's a lot of like increasing tension and relieving tension, you know? So, okay, now he's going to have his Scrooge moment, like when Scrooge wakes up and the bed curtains are still there and he throws open the window and he's like, do you know the butcher in the next street but one? Now buy the goose for the Cratchits, that kind of thing, right? So this is kind of his buy the goose for the Cratchits moment. And he's very proud of himself, you know? When he goes and he presents the tree, it's like, here it is, you know? So now we're going to have a bit of a resolution and a reconciliation because they've been honest with each other. They've like lied to each other. They've become, this is what people do when they're friends. They get past these moments. If you get past the difficulty, then the bond is stronger, right? So at this point, I wanted to show that there's actually a bond, and I wanted that kind of like Christmas family thing going on. And it's, you know, Angus says it's like the first Christmas that I've ever had, a real family homestyle Christmas. And you think maybe this will be enough, but then, you know, Angus being the guy who's going to ask the embarrassing or awkward question, Angus, the kid who's going to push it too far, you know, it's almost like when in the dinner scene when Paul says, if there's anything else I can do for you, it's like one of those things you say, you know, as a courtesy at the end of an email or a phone call, you know, it's like, if there's anything else I can do, never expecting someone's going to like, yeah, you need to take me to Boston, you know?
Yeah.
And Mary's sort of like, well, you did tell him anything, you know? So it's like, God damn it, I might have to do it, you know? So I wanted that island of connection because I was about to flip the switch and flip the script and have now feels obliged to take Angus. Yeah.
Totally. So I want to, I have a note to stop on page 74 here, but I'm gonna breeze past it just in the interest of having enough time to cover everything that we want to. So when so we'll stop on page 76 here. So when they actually get to Boston after having dropped Mary off in Roxbury,
But that one scene, I will say, I'll stop and say that scene was incredibly hard to write. That scene in her, and like where she opens the mystery box.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote it. I wrote like that was the scene that was rewritten the most because I've written a lot of dialogue between her and her sister, and I thought, you know what, I don't have the experience, and I need to leave that space for the actors, and that's why I wrote it silently with her just opening the box and her sister coming in. And what Devine does there, she can do more with 30 seconds of silence than most people can, can do with like 3 pages of dialogue. I mean, I created that space so that the enormity of her loss and the attempt at healing could be conveyed by the actor, because I felt like she could do a much better job than I could with dialogue. And I just want to say that's why I put that there.
Yeah. And it's powerful too. I mean, oof, yeah. So they get to Boston, and they're at the Brattle bookshop. And I just this hooker is
I love her so much. She just wants to get in from the cold, man. She just wants to go to a warm place. That's what she wants.
And I just the like, he doesn't mind if daddy gets a little candy cane. It reminds me, like, reading it, because the candy cane thing, comes back again and again. It's like a repeated punchline. Can you talk about your background in sitcom writing and kind of how you approach comedy in this script?
I had some phenomenal showrunners. I mean, Yvette Lee Bowser, who was my first kind of network boss, taught me a tremendous amount. Steve Levitan taught me a tremendous amount. I had early influences from some really great writers, just in terms of being a structuralist. So the same thing with the Snow Globe. Setting up and paying off the Snow Globe. Like, try to put that Chekhov's gun somewhere. Try to put something that's going to create a comedic engine and an unexpected payoff. Reference to the Miller High Life, which kind of threads its way through the script, the can which shows up again in the museum scene. All that is just me sort of using my sitcom experience to sort of to insinuate some comedic rhythms that will be slightly different from the rest of the picture. I feel really blessed, having done 27 years. First of all, to have that worked in TV consistently, I feel really blessed and really lucky. But also, as a TV writer, I feel like we are uniquely trained to be able to pivot on the rewrite front, but also to sort of like lean into how to create a bit of comic momentum. So I really owe those two showrunners I mentioned, other showrunners, and my colleagues over the years, and kind of helping me develop that muscle.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, there was a time when the fire in my loins burned white hot. Like, it's really good.
Paints a picture for you.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move on. Casey, if you want to scroll a little bit past 80 slowly, and then we're gonna get on to pages 82 through 83. But they're all connected, because we meet Hugh Kavanaugh, which is an amazing name, by the way, for a character like that. And how Paul is affected by by his encounter with him. And he's so bothered, that on page 82, he needs to go to the store to get some Jim Beam. And he's explaining how Hugh Kavanaugh plagiarized off him, and he got blamed for it. And and then ultimately why he teaches at Barton. And so, like, can you talk a little bit? Oh yeah, and then of course the button on it is the salesperson going, "Here you go, killer." But can you talk about these things? Because I feel like this is just like gold.
Yeah, thank you. That's incredibly kind of you to say. Honestly, it was line number 2, which is what I wanted to flip it. And I wanted to, again, right before this, we had this really lovely moment with her ice skating. And he's watching him ice skate. And like the Christmas thing, it's a moment where at Christmas, it was like, oh, thank you so much. This is really lovely. What a wonderful time. I want to go to Boston. Here, it's different. It's like, oh, I really enjoyed the ice skating with you. This is great. Hugh Kavanaugh, I'm going to lie about my current situation. So we've established a degree of comfort, and I'm making the characters uncomfortable. I'm pushing the characters off axis. And what I'm trying to do here is like basically go like, okay, we think we know where the relationship is going. We think they've settled into a rhythm. This is as far how lovely it is for the two of them. It's like, and then all of a sudden, like, he lies, and the kid goes along with it, and the kid actually messes with him during the lie, and effectively pisses him off, and then calls him on his bullshit, right? So
right.
Again, it's not the relationship we thought it was. Again, it's not some sort of comfortable we're pals forever kind of scenario. What it is two people continuing to discover each other. The exposition continues to come because I feel like in the best relationships in our lives, we keep learning about the people we end up loving, you know?
Right. Cool. And then on page 86, so this I think you answered this earlier because we wanted to ask you about the eye, you know, which is a great payoff, by the way, at the end of the script. But you mentioned that there was Alexander's idea, right?
Yeah.
That was the original pitch, right? Because that was our question, like how you came up with the eye. Because it's like great, it's great.
But we can move to page 89. Where Angus has snuck out of a showing of Little Big Man to go see his father.
Yep.
Paul thinks they're going to the cemetery, but they end up at the psychiatric hospital. Can you talk about writing this?
Yeah, I just sort of thought to myself, you know, what have I been plagued by or frightened by in my life? And you know, you look at your parents and you think, okay, where did they fall down? What happened? And am I capable of the same? Am I genetically wired for the same mistakes? You know, for some people it's alcoholism or drug addiction. For some people it's a certain kind of behavior. For some people it's other kinds of mental illness. You know, and I was just sort of like, what would this kid be afraid of? What was I terrified of? I was terrified that somehow whatever mistakes I'd seen, you know, my parents, my dad commit, and nothing, he wasn't mentally ill like this, but like, is this my destiny? Am I somehow cursed by this and by the collapse of my parents' marriage? And I later reconciled with my dad, and we were very close to the day he died. But it was like, you know, you look at it and you go like, what am I terrified of? And it's often, what is my legacy? What is my legacy? You know, and if this is your legacy, are you doomed, and does any of it matter? And how much self-loathing would roost in you if you were genuinely scared of this? And that's kind of what I got to when I was thinking about, you know, that visit. And that's why I wanted him to go, you know, and be heartbroken at the condition in which he found his dad, you know?
Oh yeah. And kind of moving forward from that onto page 90 and 91. On these pages, you know, when they come back from the psychiatric hospital, we have these like searing monologues where Angus essentially just like, you know, tells Paul his story. And this kind of stuff, I mean, I don't know about other people, but I find it incredibly hard to write. And I'm wondering, you know, and Paul's response too, just like, what was it like to write this?
This
like,
one was really hard. This is one of the hardest sections of the script. Like I talked about, you know, when I trying to find the Mary moments, and I wrote that dialogue where it was silence, because I just wanted to hold a space for her, and I wanted that to be what it was, because that's what that needed and that's what it deserved, and it felt appropriate to me, being who I am and being who she is, to give the actor and to give the character that space to convey it with total integrity and love. This one was very much, and I'll be really candid, like, you know, my wife will come in sometimes, I'm here in this room, and let's say it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be very emotionally overwrought, and she'd be worried about me. I'm like, look, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. So I'm like saying to myself, like everything I was afraid of, like how could my world collapse? How might I be doomed? You know, by almost like Oedipus, like what is my destiny? Am I cursed by this thing that I know exists in my family? Like, what's going to happen to me? And then I thought, how would it actually go down from the standpoint of a 16 or 17-year-old? How would he describe it? You know, and to me, I just I spent a couple of weeks just on these pages, just writing and saying and reading them to myself over and over again out loud, and trying to see. And there are 3 or 4 different turns, emotional turns in these 2 big monologues. And these are the monologues that all the actors auditioned with, because there are 3 or 4 turns in them, and we wanted to see which kids would get the turns. And Dominic just crushed it, you know, crushed it. But to answer your question, it was incredibly hard to write. I hope to God that I did it justice, that I did the characters justice. I wanted it to be as honest and terrifying as possible. He's just telling us the truth about how scared he is, you know?
yeah.
It's Paul's job to come in and go like, look, I want to set your mind at ease about a few things. You know, here's some baseline things that you should understand about yourself and about your destiny. And, you know, this is the greatest lesson he could give this kid or any kid. And I felt like this is what my uncle did for me, you know, growing up. He was this dispassionate observer who could be incredibly tough, you know, incredibly tough on me. By the same token, tell me a truth. Listen to the totality of my terror, and like kind of tease it apart and go like, here's what I want you to think about and what you want you to focus on. So this to me is the most intimate moment between them in the entire movie. And
It totally is, as a viewer too.
you
Yeah.
had to earn it. You can only do it late in the movie. If you did this on page 20, the movie would be terrible. But if you get it to like page, what page are we on right now?
91.
91. Okay, like late in the movie, earn it.
Mhm.
I felt like I had to earn it. If I was gonna actually connect with my viewers and my readers, I had to earn it, and it could only come here, and it had to be very specific. So it was a lot of work to get to these lines.
Yeah. Well, and something else that feels really well earned, going to page 95, where they meet up with Mary again at that restaurant, and Angus isn't allowed to have Cherry's Jubilee.
Happened to me. That's why it's in there. It happened to me when I was 9 years old. That Anthony Stewart from Boston. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. And so they try to make their own in the parking lot, and it's yet another moment of like sweetness and connection for Paul gone completely awry. But there's like, I noticed this payoff too, on, I guess it's page 96, where Angus wants to, explode an M80 for New Year's. And ultimately when it is New Year's, he, deploys it in the kitchen and nothing goes wrong. And they all have this gorgeous hug, and Danny's there, and it's like,
We see
and that also feels well earned.
outside, like almost like a Currier and Ives painting, or like a snow globe. I mean, I definitely, Alexander's, like I said, a brilliant director, but that was one shot that I was like, we don't go inside. We see it all from outside. We don't hear it. We see it. We see the explosion, because, I wanted it to be almost like this hermetically sealed thing, like the snow globe, where we're looking into this kind of beautiful moment, And by the way, could have been the end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's punchline number one,
And then the joy of that, of course, is short-lived, because on page 98, this crane comes and summons him, and now it's the climax. And then on page 100, Paul, he gets busted for taking Angus to see his father, and this is when he says he's probably going to get. Oh, we love this moment, by the way, when he says Angus says he's probably going to be sent to military school. And of course, Mary is so pivotal here, because she, of all people, knows the ramifications of military school and so forth. And the fact that she takes his hand is just a wonderful moment.
Yeah, I just thought that was just a wonderful moment. I mean, I moved to tears there. I think Dave Vine's just a genius, a brilliant actor, and this kid Dom, who came out of nowhere, has just proven himself to be born to be a film actor. In that moment, just felt like there was love there, and that's what I was going for, and it surpassed anything that I could have conceived of in my mind.
It tears me up even just looking at it, like in the script. Like, whew. Yeah.
And then of course on page 101, the sacrifice that Paul does, he has every opportunity to just tell us, and then he decides not to do that. And
there's the reserve shoot. The reserve shoot is right there. Oh, by the way, I was going to say the other possible ending could have been right before Miss Crane walked in. It could have been like, take out your pencils, end of movie.
Right.
End of movie.
Yeah.
Back to the rational world, and we see them share a smile, end of movie. But we go past it, we go into this, and the way he falls on his sword for the kid. I love the way Alexander shot it too, because there's tension. You kind of cut around to the people looking at Paul, and all Paul has to do is go, yeah, you're right, he misled me. And Paul's job is secure forever. And the kid's off to military school, and Paul saved his own bacon, but he can't do it, because notwithstanding the fact that he'd been living a lie about how, about graduating from Harvard and all this other stuff, when push comes to shove, he is that stoic hero. He is that romantic hero, demonstrates through this action that he's learned that there's something more. He says when they're walking in that walk and talk, in Boston after the liquor store, he says, I love Barton. Barton is my life. Barton is everything to me. I don't know what I do without Barton. He says like 4 times, So now he's like, I'm going to throw it all away. But I hope to God, I wrote it so that I hope we'd earned it. And I hope that people feel like we've earned it there, in this moment.
And then page 102, 2 great things. Paul calls Dr. Woodruff penis cancer in human form, which is the best line, really. That's the best line. I feel like you were saving that for the end. And then, and then the payoff, he emerges from the office and tells him, what is it, the left eye, right? The left eye, right. So we just love that. And
Well, it really it feels to me like I remember like many years ago reading Three Uses of the Knife by David Mamet, and this to me like feels like Three Uses of the Lie. And by like the third lie, it's
He
like
lies. He lies, and the most no Barton men do not lie. And yet the most Barton man thing to do with being a Barton man means to have integrity and love for your fellow man, and to be a truly, like, to be the stoic hero, to be the romantic hero. It is to lie. It is to run against the code and tell the lie, the noble lie that saves the kid,
And I also think it's on page 103. It's just another like really great moment with Mary giving Paul the notebook. Because it's more than just a notebook. Obviously, it's like the gift of encouragement and believing in him. And I want to, like, at the bottom of the page, another one of my favorite lines is that's your problem, man. Just write one word after the other. How hard can that?
That was written for all of my writer friends out there on this.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, everyone here.
How hard can that be, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And just scooting along ever so quickly to page 105 here, this final moment between Paul and Angus. Can you talk about writing this? Like,
yeah, it was the goodbye, and it was like I wanted Angus to try to hustle him one last time. Because we can take it, grab a burger and a beer, Miller High Life, no doubt. He's like, yeah, well, they already fired you, so I figured it was worth a shot, So there's that, your logic is flawless, but not today. And the key thing about this moment for me was in 1970, like, and we were on the day we're shooting, we're losing the light, So if you look at it, you'll see that the kid is squinting at him because the light's right in his eyes, and the reverse is Paul sort of in the sort of, because so much natural lighting in the movie, right? Paul's kind of like in semi-darkness, which actually really works thematically. But you don't hug. And literally a few senior members of the crew came over to me, because I'm a producer on the movie, and said, don't you think you guys should get one with a hug? And Alexander and I, because we're very kindred spirits in many respects and very good friends, simultaneously, having overheard this, we're like, no hug.
Yeah.
No, because it didn't feel real to either of us. It felt like they'd be going in, you think it's a hug, and it's a handshake,
Right.
And then,
yeah, that was a good move.
And then the kid saying "see ya" and running away is what a 16 or 17-year-old kid would do. You just go.
Yeah.
And
we never see each other again.
Giamatti is brilliant. Paul Giamatti, I consider him to be the finest actor of his generation. And I will say that the way he says "see ya," when you just hold it on his face, and I was there on the day, and Alexander, very quiet because he doesn't use the monitor, just leans in, and I heard him say, there he goes, there the kid goes, that's your life, that's his life, that's everything going away. You're losing it all, and something may come, but right now you're losing it all. And you see him, just watch him, and they're like tears kind of standing in his eyes, but they never break. And we cut out. And to me, that is like one of the great moments in this movie. And I think it's one of the greatest performances I've ever seen from an actor, certainly in Paul's generation. I just think he's amazing in it, amazing.
Incredible.
Absolutely.
Incredible. Well, we have one final wrap this up question, and it's about the bottle.
I'll stay until midnight. I'm good. I can hang out. I love talking to you guys.
It's like a bet.
I know this. Honestly, I mean, I wish we had like 4 hours because I want to go over every page. But the cognac.
Yeah.
Okay, so Javier and I have
that's your sitcom writing training right there. Sitcom writers. My sitcom writers out there, this is for you. That's for you. Television sitcom.
Yeah.
So we have 2 takes, I guess, Lauren and I. And we want to see which one is correct. So my take was that it's a little bit like The Verdict, where in the end, at the verdict, you see coffee steam, meaning he gave up drinking, because him spitting it out, it's a $4,000 bottle of liquor, right? Yeah. Of all things to spit out, maybe that's not the one, but he spits it out. So I interpret it as like he's not only setting himself free of that life, but also of drinking. And Lauren had another interpretation.
I think that he's spitting it out because it's the the rich people bullshit. Like he's washing his mouth with it and just like spitting it out. He's done with that now, and he's like on the road to like,
I think that Paul will have a complicated relationship, because I always think of their lives after the movie. To me, the movie doesn't end. I have thoughts of where they each went afterwards, but I don't know if Paul gives up drinking per se. I think he's got a new relationship with him. I think Mary kind of gives up drinking though, because she asked for a cup of tea at that
I
restaurant.
noticed that. Yeah.
I think Mary gives up drinking, honestly. But I don't think Paul does. But I think, Lauren, that what you had in your head was closer to what I was going for, which was, it was kind of one of these, spit out that $4,000 mouthful of cognac, was him sort of saying, I'm done with this bullshit. And I just love the fact that he stole it. I mean, that was sort of like, to me, I just love that he stole it. Like the kid stole the snow glove, like he stole this incredibly valuable bottle of whiskey, or bottle of cognac rather. So, to me, it was mostly about, it was about that, it was about, it was him flipping off authority one last time.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, as an ending, it's like, it's
The chef's kiss from you. Thank you for the chef's
yes,
kiss.
chef's kiss, chef's kiss. And
When she likes something, that's what she does.
yeah. Yeah, when something I'll literally be reading a script in the library, and and for me that was one of those moments.
I'm deeply honored. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, okay, so we've come to the end of the script. There it is. It says the end. I mean, like I said though, I mean, God, I could do this, I could go for 3.5 hours, truly.
No, I love talking to you guys, and this one's one from the heart. I mean, I lived this
yeah.
script, and there's so many things in it that kind of harken back to my childhood. Like, even, we didn't talk about it, but the hooker thing, getting approached with the candy cane, that happened to me on 2nd Avenue and East 30th Street with Earl, and we got approached, and it was like, he can wait around the corner. Like, this is like in 1970, 71, on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, over by Bellevue, where he lived. So, I mean,
did she say, it's okay if daddy wants a little candy cane?
Those were the exact lines, but I do remember, like, he can wait here, because we were walking his 2 dogs, Oogie and Charlie. So she was like, he can watch the dogs. We can just go around the corner, that kind of thing.
Well,
thank you so much for doing it.
And just, I really, really hope you enjoy the rest of, this journey with this movie and stuff. I mean, you deserve all the accolade. It's so, everyone clearly in the chat, everyone agrees it's popping off.
Yeah.
I get very self-conscious about stuff, so I'm not reading it. But for those of you who tuned in, I hope that this was helpful and instructive. I wanted to tell you that, I feel so lucky to have been in the Guild for 27 years and to have the colleagues that I've had and had the experience, and to have learned from the writers that I've learned from. So, I mean, if this resonates with you or for you, that's what I wanted to accomplish. So I'm just really grateful. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you.
And we're grateful too.
So
yeah, round of applause once again.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
See you soon. Thanks again.
Bless you guys.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. Thanks so much for coming.